Now, the British Parliament is preparing to vote on whether to hold a referendum on its continued membership of the European Union. The debate was forced after more than 100,000 people signed a petition demanding a say. Now, the vote won't be binding, but Prime Minister David Cameron is a staunch supporter of the EU and faces a rebellion in his own party. Some 60 Conservative MPs are defying government orders and will support the idea of a nationwide referendum. Cameron has urged the dissenting Tories to reconsider, saying this is a delicate time for the EU. All right, for more perspective on the vote and its outcome, now we're joined live by Nigel Farage, MEP from the UK Independence Party. Let's cross to him live right now. Mr. Farage, thank you for coming on the programme today. At the end of the day, only 70 out of 650 MPs are likely to support the idea of a referendum to leave the EU. Do you get the feeling that no one is buying your argument, perhaps?
Oh, amongst the political classes, no one's buying the argument. No, absolutely. I mean, there is total agreement amongst the Conservatives, Labour and the Lib Dems that we must be, firstly, in the EU. Secondly, we must try never to discuss it at all. You know, don't frighten the children. And thirdly, the big deal is let's make sure the British people don't get a referendum. So there is total agreement amongst them. But the UKIP argument is resonating in the country in a way that it never did before. You see, when we talk about the EU or Europe, call it what you will, we're not talking about Article 136, subsection 2. We're not talking about some terribly technical detail. What we're talking about is open border, unlimited immigration into Britain. What we're talking about is the European Convention on Human Rights, turning our legal system literally upside down. What we're talking about are regulations that are damaging British businesses. What we're talking about are British jobs being lost, increasingly to foreign workers. What we're talking about is a bill of £45 million a day for this club, when here we are mired in recession. So the British people are realising when we talk about the EU, it affects them. And Cameron, Miliband and Clegg are absolutely terrified.
Mr. Farage, if I just may jump in for a moment here, surely there have been some benefits, though, to being a part of the European Union. It can't all be doom and gloom.
Well, I take the same view that Norman Lamont takes, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, now in the House of Lords. And Lamont said recently he couldn't see a single benefit we derived from EU membership that we couldn't have got as a nation state agreeing bilateral free trade deals. And I agree with him completely. Look, my mum and dad, my parents' generation, voted in a referendum back in 1975 to be part of a common market, to have a free trade deal. What they weren't told is we were joining a political union. And what UKIP are saying, loudly and clearly, is we should not be part of that political union. Let's have a trade deal, let's be neighbours, let's be friends, let's cooperate. Let's have deals on reciprocal workers, on exchange students. Let's do all of those things. But for goodness sake, let's not have 75% of our laws now made with the institutions of the European Union with people like Herman Van Rompuy in charge. That now, to over 2/3 of the British public, is simply not acceptable.
But there are some that do say that doesn't the price of leaving far outweigh the costs of staying? After all, the benefits of staying in the EU for trade alone were rather large. What does Britain get from leaving all that behind?
I mean, look, we talk about trade. Norway and Switzerland trade with the EU without being members of it. The EU has or is currently negotiating 98 trade agreements all over the world. Goodness me, we're their biggest marketplace. Of course we can have a simple free trade agreement with them. That is no problem at all. They need us, frankly, in trading terms, far more than we need them. So far from leaving the EU costing us money, it'll save us a lot of money. Some estimates say that freed of the European Union, able to get rid of some of the most appalling regulations that firms have to suffer on health and safety, on the environment, on employment legislation, we could add as much as 5% to Britain's gross domestic product. So the question now, in a deep recession and with unemployment at a 17-year high, is not can we afford to leave the EU, it's can we afford to stay.
All right, if I may just jump in for a moment, the end of the war between European nations, democracy is flourishing in 27 countries, shopping without frontiers has given consumers more power, crime busting through cooperation through Europol. I mean, Europe is helping to save the planet with regulatory cuts in CO2, booming international voice. What's your thoughts on that?
We had Interpol in the 1920s. where the police forces of European countries agreed to cooperate together. Why do we need Europol? You see, it sums it up. I want a Europe where we cooperate together and work together and sign agreements together, not a Europe where we hand over the ability to make those decisions to a group of unelected bureaucrats. And on the argument of peace, which now the EU supporters have fallen back on because all their other arguments, frankly, have failed, look, what kept the peace in Europe after 1945 was not the EU. That didn't come along for many, many years. What kept the peace was NATO, an example of states cooperating together, and I would also argue the fact that we had the nuclear deterrent. And history shows you that if you take away from people their democracy, their ability to govern themselves, if you corral them together into new states without their consent, far from it leading to peace, goodness me, look at Yugoslavia. Well, they tried exactly the same thing, and it led to war.
Let's just for a moment, let's look at what's happened over this past weekend. I do apologise for interrupting. 27 EU leaders are gathering in Brussels to once again address the ongoing crisis of the Eurozone, so on and so forth. What do you make of yesterday's spat between Cameron and Sarkozy? Britain saying that it wants more say in Eurozone matters, but it's not even in it. Who's right here?
You know, the strange irony with the whole Eurozone project is that what it's done, far from bringing people closer together, it's pushed people further apart. Not just with Sarkozy being rude to Cameron, we now have the Greeks abusing the Germans, they now burn EU flags in Athens openly with swastikas drawn on them, and we have the Germans slagging off the Greeks as being lazy and useless, and the irony of this project is far from us all becoming friends together in this new European house. Actually, we're beginning to argue and bicker in the most extraordinary way. You cannot take 27 different countries with 21 different languages, all with their own different histories and different forms of government. You cannot take them and force them into one unitary form of government without first getting their approval. That approval has never been given, and the European project actually is dying as we look at it. Oh, it may take many years, just as the Soviet Union did, but it's dying as we look at it, because right across Europe, the voters are saying, we don't want this model, we reject it.
If I may, so the vote on a possible referendum for the UK withdrawing from the EU, we spoke to people yesterday from the People's Pledge Council who were saying, well, even if the referendum did by some vague, distant chance get approved to happen, it would take years to happen. So what is the whole point of having this vote on the referendums? Many of our analysts saying it's simply a matter of democratic principle, people being given more of a voice. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, look, here we have the most important constitutional question that we're ever going to face in my lifetime, namely, do we govern our own country or not? The fact that it's actually being debated on the floor of the House of Commons today must be a good thing. What is a bad thing is that the cynicism of the three-party leaders has meant they've all put three-line whips on it. They're encouraging people not to speak out in favour of a referendum. And what it will lead to tomorrow, I think, in Britain, are millions of people feeling very, very disappointed that their politicians don't trust them to have a say. And I suspect, in the middle of all of this, the only beneficiary will actually be my party, UKIP, because increasingly people will say, why on earth should we go on voting Conservative if they won't give us what we want?
All right, Nigel Farage, a member of the UK Independence Party and MEP. Many thanks indeed.